No, supplier controls, they really matter. I think that it's not understood how much impact they have on product. And yeah, you think about your contract manufacturer, of course you're going to qualify them, but it's all this little detail and nuance, especially when you get more and more using McMaster-Carr, Amazon, that Home Depot screw. And yeah, it's just a screw, but you're making a medical device. And so it matters in a way
Yeah.
that it wouldn't in other industries. So for purchasing controls, which is really about supplier controls, it always starts with supplier controls. Your purchase orders is the very last section. The first thing they talk about is evaluation of suppliers, contractors, and consultant. Think about all the purchasing procedures that you've ever seen, all your supplier control procedures. You know what is really hard for companies to do is realize that there are three buckets of suppliers. How many procedures have you looked at where everyone gets treated the same? A contractor is not the same as a service person, is not the same as a consultant.
Mm-hmm.
And you have this blanket supplier assessment. And it's like, send me your quality manual, send me your ISO certifications. And it really could be like this long, and send me your resume for a consultant. That's
Yep.
like what I think about is poor supplier control designs because people are just lazy. And even the 21 CFR, which is like 15-minute read, specifies
Mm-hmm.
that there's three buckets of suppliers.
And in the discussion that I was in this morning, that came up, and it was totally tangent to what we were talking about. And somebody brought up that classic supplier control form, the initial qualification checklist.
Mm-hmm.
And it just basically kind of goes through either the CFR or ISO requirements and sections. And there's like yes, no, or NA. Well, people send that same form to consultants. And
Yeah.
then they just mark NA, NA, NA. And then somebody writes approved at the bottom. Well, like, what does that really demonstrate about that person or firm's, competency or skill sets?
Oh, how many times have you had like someone in a last minute audit realize that they never received, our auditor certifications or our
Mm-hmm.
resume because they didn't require it because they use that checklist and it's not appropriate. And then they're in the middle of their ISO audit and they're like, flagged urgent.
Yep.
Please send me your resume and your audit certificates.
And then, one thing I think we're seeing a lot lately is for software companies where it's software only and all their developers are in-house and we did their 510K, but they think because they have no, hardware or products related to the actual, medical device that they're selling, that they don't need supplier controls. Well, guess what? We're a supplier.
Mm-hmm.
If they outsource something complicated like cybersecurity, that there's a lot of new regulations around. That is a outsourced process that needs supplier controls. So even then, you could probably have a really short supplier control procedure with really short qualification forms, but you still have to have them.
Yep, absolutely. And, what are the requirements? Like when you have components, what do you kind of look for when you're determining something as a supplier or something, that really needs a level of control versus a supplier that doesn't go on your approved suppliers list, which,
Mhm.
by the way, is not a formal definition or formally documented in the 21 CFR, but it's an unofficial requirement.
Hey, what do you do if Amazon's a supplier or
Yep, that's
Ace
exactly where I was
Hardware?
going. What
Yeah,
about circuit boards and
yeah,
off-the-shelf
screws.
screws and
Mhm.
Amazon? How do you qualify them? How do you control
Yeah,
those? That's a hard conversation to have.
yeah. I ran out of 3/4 inch screws and I went to Ace Hardware, you
Mm,
know?
yep.
So, you need to think about, those off the shelf components and what is the right way to control those? Do you control those some other way than at a supplier level? Maybe at a specification level, but that still has to be defined in your purchasing controls procedure.
Yep, that's a really smart way to handle it, is to qualify the component when it's a generic off-the-shelf component and have a checklist, because it gives you some more flexibility. But it's a sophisticated way of doing supplier controls that you don't see very often, because a lot of times you see in supplier controls, I feel like it's personally a very neglected area that doesn't get, it's always scrutinized in audits. So I don't know why this is the way that it is, but you have a generic checklist for everyone. You don't stay on top of getting everyone's renewals for their ISO certs. You might do your audits, and that's the only thing that really matters to you. And you might look at just the big guys, but every part that makes your product matters, right? Every little piece. So,
I think that goes right into, define the type and extent of control to be exercised over the product, service, suppliers, etc., based on the evaluation of these results. Well, that the type and extent doesn't mean that everybody and every component gets treated the same way.
Right. It's a great way to leverage a risk-based approach in your quality management system. And it's not mentioned in the 21 CFR, but that's how a lot of people can actually justify how they qualify certain suppliers, is they do a risk assessment. They say, this is my contract manufacturer. I have a class 2 device. They do the sterility. So obviously they need the strictest controls. Whereas, this off-the-shelf component that's on the outer packaging that, might not require that level of extensive controls. It really comes down to a real assessment, and the assessment can be documented right in your procedure too.
So, let's move on to, I think, what leads to the misnomer of it being called purchasing controls rather than supplier controls, and talk about the purchase order.
What do you want to mention about your purchase order?
Yeah. So the purpose of the purchase order is to demonstrate the level of control that you have over the communication with the supplier about the component you're ordering. So, do you necessarily have to issue Amazon or Ace Hardware a purchase order? No. But if you've got like a custom component, or you're buying something that is off the shelf but has a rev level or specifications, terms and conditions, like all of these things need to be specified inside of your purchase order. And too often I see people who are just put a part number that they're ordering on their purchase orders, but they don't put the rev level of that component.
Yeah.
There's nothing in their terms and conditions that requires a notification of change, for instance. So what do you think about that whole purchase order, purchasing control situation?
I think purchase orders get people in trouble because exactly that. You see people that are missing the rev number, and we've all been in a scenario where documentation doesn't get transferred over, and maybe you've made a change, or maybe they've made a change to your product that really impacts you. I remember, we had off-the-shelf vials, and they had a very specific lid colorant, right? Just for visualization, but they were off-the-shelf components. It just so happened that they changed the colorant in the lid, and they had revved up the part internally. Well, obviously from my company, that was a big deal because we had qualified that vial with that extractable and leachable. And, they notified us that they were changing the lid, and we had to mass purchase their back inventory. And so when they sent us them, we were like, no, you sent us the wrong ones. We specified we needed Rev 3, and it had to be this color lid, and you sent us the new ones. So it's right here, like you need to send me the ones that are off the shelf and all the inventory you got so that I can qualify your new product. That's kind of the thing that people get in trouble with, and it's so easy to miss. It's so easy to miss when you have hundreds of components that go in. You have to really know what you're looking for, and it gets a little into incoming inspection where you need to set the right information in your PO so that you can set incoming inspection up for success.
Especially if they are receiving off of a CFC.
Yeah.
They need to be verifying not just that they have a CFC, but that the information on that CFC matches the purchase order and the print for that part. So that's one best practice in purchasing controls that goes over into incoming inspection. And then the other best practice, I think, in purchasing controls to communicate those rev levels is I've seen the better purchasing agents actually include a copy of the print, not just specifying the rev level. And and they do that even with prints that haven't changed in, say, 5-10 years. They're like, I'm just going to always make sure that the supplier I am purchasing this from has no questions, because the print will have the dimensions. It often has the inspection criteria, and other important information that the supplier should be operating under.
Material, lid colors, all those good things.
Yep. I've also seen it where like companies will up-rev a part specification. They'll send it over to, say, the quality engineer partner at their supplier controls. And for whatever reason, that's where it stops. It doesn't get into their document control, or they're receiving an inspection or release or whatever process is supposed to be verifying the customer's part number, rev number, specifications, etc. And so by sending the actual print over, it's like a safety for that supplier communication that's supposed to happen when you change a specification.
Yeah. No, supplier controls, they really matter. I think that it's not understood how much impact they have on product. And yeah, you think about your contract manufacturer, of course you're going to qualify them, but it's all this little detail and nuance, especially when you get more and more using McMaster-Carr, Amazon, that Home Depot screw. And yeah, it's just a screw, but you're making a medical device. And so it matters in a way that it wouldn't in other industries.
Last but not least, let's talk about quality agreements.
I love me a good quality agreement. Yeah, we can talk all about the years that it takes to get quality agreements through. And
they're just as important as supply agreements. And in my opinion, they should be two separate agreements.
Yeah.
The quality agreement needs to be almost as extensive as the terms in the supplier agreement. There needs to be no confusion about who's on first, what's on second, what roles and responsibilities are.
Yep. Absolutely. Like a good quality agreement should be crystal clear, and it should address basically every part of 21 CFR 820 in some form, so there's no confusion about who's responsible for what. If you are using a contract manufacturer and you want to leverage their supplier controls, they better have something in there that tells you that they're going to notify you if they change suppliers or they change anything else. This can be so critical, especially if you have a 510K, if you have...
Or you're private labeling one of their devices that they have the 510K on.
Yep. And you need to...
But your name is on it.
Notified, but your name is on it and you're ultimately responsible. It's important to... And people get so hung up on them, even though it is standard practice in industry. And it really makes sense, because you should approach quality agreements as a joint responsibility. I mean, ultimately, if you're leveraging that much of someone else's system, it is a joint responsibility. And so they kind of get brushed under the rug, or they get made, they always get stuck in legal, but they're really important for the integrity of your device and making sure that they're not going to make changes without notifying you, and making sure that they understand you're making a medical device and you need to follow these rules.
Yeah.
But they get stuck, they get gummed up a lot. And it's a lot of rehashing the same things over and over and over so people feel comfortable with where we're all at. I think our top tip is to put in a chart that says exactly who's doing what and who's
Exactly.
responsible for what, because it's just that quick glance of, okay, what am I supposed to do again?
Yep.
What am I supposed to do again?
I think from, a legal and technical perspective, the words are important, but that chart is really the clincher because it takes any of the guesswork out of,
Yep.
reading through that agreement.
Of
And
an
then,
interpretation.
yeah, exactly. And then, I think that that chart makes driving discussions about which column the X goes in, yours or your suppliers, a lot easier to have. And then there, we always include a comment section as well, so that line by line, we can tease out maybe any details where, like maybe device listing, where both companies should have a device listing for the product, but one has for a certain type of role, like contract manufacturer, repackager, relabeler versus specification developer. That kind of thing, that really helps with those conversations.
Yeah. And then it makes it feel less like, I don't know, a scary legal document and more like a business relationship, because, you should have a good relationship with your suppliers. It makes everything better anyway.
Yep. All right. I think that we covered all the high points and maybe even some of the low points of supplier controls. So we'll see everybody next time.